Good morning if you're logging on from the East Coast in the US, and good later in the day if you're logging on from Europe or further east. My name is Niels Holm Nielsen. I'm the practice manager for the Global Facility for Disaster Reduction and Recovery. I will be opening and closing this event this morning. Our facility focuses on disaster risk. So you might ask yourself, what does that have to do with energy efficiency? The simple answer to that is not necessarily all that much on its own. However, one of the key lines of work that we have relates to building regulations. And when bank teams engage in building regulations, it often will be a missed opportunity if we only focus on the piece that our facility and our unit has primary expertise in. Energy efficiency in buildings and improving that from a regulatory point of view is an opportunity across many of our client countries. And for that reason, our team has engaged with experts and specialists and partnered with other teams across the bank to produce knowledge and to partner with others and their knowledge related to this space that hopefully enables us, when we engage for the purposes of climate or disaster risk management, to also advise task teams on how to think about and integrate issues or concepts related to energy efficiency. I don't think I need to express too much about the importance of the topic of energy efficiency. I'm sure the speakers will dig a little bit further into that. But there's no doubt that it's going to be complicated to achieve some of the key global targets without fixing energy efficiency in some of the existing building stock. There's plenty of numbers that indicates that that's an important piece of the puzzle. So that, of course, means that the energy efficiency angle on its own is relevant. We also hope through this conversation and the partnerships we're engaging in that when others in our institution engage for the purposes of energy efficiency, that they will also see the value that there is in their process to consider the resilience and the risk management value that a team like ours can bring into their conversation. Because, of course, that opportunity is probably equally important. It doesn't make much sense to fix the energy efficiency of a building if it then falls apart in an earthquake. So with those relatively simple overview comments, let's jump straight to this morning session. We're calling it a BBL. The L originally stands for lunch. That's a little too early for that on our side here. We will hear and we will see a presentation on a tool, a checklist that we have developed. Vasudevan will be giving us that presentation in a few minutes. Anna Campos, who sits here on my right, she will be moderating our session today. Keiko, who leads the building regulations program from my unit, she will give an overview first of the program itself. We will then also hear from Swati, who works on the corporate side of buildings and emissions and the climate change targets that we have set as an institution to make sure that we bring in that angle as well. Then we will have some time for Q&A, I hope. And sorry, I didn't mention Omid. We will hear from Omid, who manages, maybe we can call it a sibling tool, Edge, out of the IFC side of our institution. We will hear about that tool as well to try to create as full a picture as we can in this relatively short session. So with that, I will pass the floor over to Keiko.
Thank you so much, Niels. Thank you so much, everybody, for connecting this morning and this evening, maybe in your time. My name is Keiko. Together with Anna, we're leading this global work called Building Regulation for Resilience. And we actually had another BBL in the morning last week, and we talked about the fire safety on the other day. And then today we are talking about the green buildings. And before, Vas is going to talk about the contents of the checklist, I just wanted to give you a kind of brief overview of our program and how we work with the task teams. So building integration for resilience is a kind of work started in 2016, and then it aims to help with help the government to improve their building regulatory frameworks and implementation capacity to create a better compliance and better enforcement mechanism for the market. And we started from the safety angle, resilience angle in the beginning, but over the time, we also integrated green and inclusive accessibility perspective based on the needs on the ground and demand from the clients. And we usually provide, as a work under the GFDRR, we usually provide 4 line of works services. One is regulatory review and advisory services. Second is building control process review and advisory. This also includes the digitalization strategy for the building control process. And then the third aspect is capacity building. We also provide to support to the government to develop capacity building and training contents for the both public and then private sector building professionals. And the last piece is global knowledge and good practices, which is, I think, today's topic. We study about different building code from different part of the world and try to come up with the most critical information in terms of the green buildings and try to share it as a kind of checklist for many governments. Just before, we're going to talk about the details, I just wanted to remind why it is so important, and it's so important, to invest in building regulatory capacity. It's just simply it's because it's cost effective. Over the years that we already know by the data that investing in improvement of the building regulation will generate a lot of benefit. And according to the U.S. statistics, $1 investment improving the building regulation would create $13 benefit of the risk reduction. So in terms of the risk reduction of the built environment and people's life. And what you see on the left side is a typical structure of the building regulatory frameworks. But of course, in different part of the world, that the different framework works. So we're also learning different system of regulatory system, and we are also trying to understand how we can also bring in different technical partners who are specialized in different system of the regulation. But then the benefit of this kind of improved or enhanced building regulatory framework is we can remove the misunderstanding or limited understanding, and we can facilitate better compliance. For example, in some years ago, we did a study in India, and we realized there are so many people who are actually misunderstanding provision of the building code or building regulation, because sometimes it's not maybe written in a way that people can easily understand, or there are some area which like leave the room for people to interpret in their own way. This is not only in India, it's everywhere in the world. But by improving the regulatory framework, we can remove this kind of the knowledge gap. And now I would like to talk about how our team work with the country teams. We work with the country team across different project preparation cycle, and we have some different tools across different stages. But we join, from the initial scoping and then dialogue session. That's the time where we do the quick analysis of the regulatory framework of that country, and then try to pre-identify possible entry point for the dialogue. And then once the dialogue advances and then the client is interested in this topic, we provide more in-depth diagnostics. And that's where our tools would come into handy. And then I'll talk about it later. And then the next step is about the prioritization of investment activities and policy reforms. So we have cases of supporting both DPOs and then also IPFs. And in both cases, we help the teams to identify, or the government to identify the prior actions, indicators, for the part DPOs and then investment activities under the IPF. And then we also stay on to support the implementation aspect if the project goes to the board and then start the implementation cycle. And then now I would like to talk about two tools that our team has for the diagnostic aspect. Maybe some of you know the tool on the left side. It's called Building Regulatory Capacity Assessment that we have been using for the past years. And then we already use in 15 countries and states. And this is tools that are looking at the overall regulatory framework and capacity aspect of the people to use it. In last fiscal year, but in addition, last fiscal year, we developed the tool on the right side. It's called Building Code Checklist. It's a series of checklists. We have currently 4 modules, and out of 4, fire and green buildings were published last fiscal year. And we are going to publish for the structural resilience and universal design for this fiscal year. Why we developed this is because while we are using this BRCA to look into the overall regulatory gaps and then where the improvement can happen, many government requested the support for the contents of the building code because they knew that their building code is not comprehensive, or they don't have building code and they want to develop but they don't know how to do it. So we did a comparative study of different building codes and then started to compile the most critical information which are covered in many building codes and come up with as a checklist which can be utilized by the government to do the self-check, or they can also hire expert to do that, or they can also access our support to do the check. But that would basically help the government to know what kind of additional element can be integrated into building code and how to make their building code more comprehensive and usable. And just before handing over to Vasu, I just wanted to mention we have been working in the all 6 regions and different countries, but particularly in the green building aspect, this is area which is not so much mandatory in the building code. Most of the country, this is still kind of voluntary mechanism and voluntary kind of provisions, and it's up to people whether they would integrate or not. But maybe simply because structural angle, if you don't follow, people will be killed. But maybe green building aspect, it's not related to the life safety, but Vasu would talk about how much benefit people can benefit it if they comply with green buildings provision. But I just wanted to mention this is still a kind of area where we need to make a push. And I think that's why also I think it's really great to hear from IFC's EDGE program, which is kind of stimulating the market. So our like a regulatory perspective is more to provide a minimum standard from the government side, but later we're going to hear about how the market would also be stimulated to join the forces. So I stop here and hand over to Anna. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Keiko, for the introduction. And with this overall picture of what the Building Regulations for Resilience program does, we will get a deep dive now on the green buildings tool. So I would like to introduce Vasu. He's an architect with a very broad experience in any kind of buildings, but specifically also on green buildings. He has been a consultant for the World Bank and for IFC. And he was one of the main contributors to the green building codes for Colombia and Indonesia through the IFC. So he has hands-on experience in several countries, and that was fundamental for the development of the tool, to have that experience from the practice to see what we should include in this checklist. So without further introductions, I know Vasu's CV is very impressive, but you want to hear from him on the context, so I will pass it over to him.
Thank you so much, Anna and Keiko. Good to see all of you here. I hope you can hear me. Great. Okay. So I'm just going to share the screen and okay, so is the screen visible?
Yes, perfectly.
Thank you. So yeah, this has been I must say, a unique experience for me, and it just helped me sort of gain a much larger perspective on how codes are done in different parts of the world. Uh, and I must say that while I might have done some amount of work on this, I think a lot of it was contributed by so many people across the world. Must express my gratitude to all of them. Some of them are here in this room, including Keiko and Umid and Anna and so many others. Yeah. So today I will speak about the background of why and how buildings are connected with the GHG emissions. A lot of you, I'm sure, are already aware of the connections. Uh, and what exactly does the checklist do, and how do we kind of use it? We've also been working while the checklist was getting developed, and during its final stages, we actually got some interesting experiences where we could use the checklist in a few countries. So I'm going to just talk about those experiences. And then how does it kind of fit into the overall operations of the bank? So that's sort of the structure of the presentation. So, of course, why invest in green building? Buildings contribute to approximately 37% of the CO2 emissions across the world. The broad breakup being that about 17% comes from the residential sector, 11 from the non-residential, and 9 from the building materials. So this sort of data from the global ABC, that is the global buildings and construction report that happens every year. So this kind of is a very telling example of, or a telling statistic that buildings have a lot to do, and improvements of buildings can actually make huge amount of a difference in the global GHG emissions. Uh, and what are green buildings? There are many definitions of these, but probably the World Green Building Council's definition sort of can give a fairly large. So some of them call it energy efficiency, some of them call it by other names, but I think it's sort of all encompassing in that sense. So this, of course, we will also look at it in the checklist itself, where you will see that it's got a broad swath in terms of the way we define green buildings. Basically, the CO2 emissions in the green building sector, the building itself sees a fairly long life cycle. So right from material manufacture, which will include extraction of materials, whether it's steel or cement or many other things, clay for your flooring tiles, and so many of these things come from extraction of materials. And then, of course, they're processed, manufactured, and then transportation. So all of these have certain GHG impacts. The design process is the point which actually gives you the opportunity to be able to reduce the impact, the resource impact, or rather enhance the resource efficiency. So broadly, it could be done through energy efficient design, water efficient design, and materials. So these are the three sort of pillars on which green buildings stand. The construction process itself can be streamlined to make it less energy intensive, less water intensive, less polluting. So that's another aspect. But of course, the big chunk of the greenhouse gas emissions will come from the operations. So broadly in terms of the energy and water use. So you might ask what water has got to do. Water, of course, is a finite resource, and then of course water also has a certain embodied energy in it in terms of the more water you use, the more electricity one uses to sort of transport water across the entire building. And then, of course, there is end of life, and we are far from perfecting this aspect. So especially when it comes to building materials, there is this whole concept of cradle to grave. And then you can probably the idea is to make it cradle to cradle, which is where the idea of sort of circularity comes in. On the energy and water, I'll kind of explain it in the following slides. From a global perspective, many NDCs, many countries have buildings as a part of their NDCs. This kind of gives you an overall map of how countries are uh, sort of satisfying their NDC requirements through buildings. So this is the status that is there across the world. So broadly, what are the four aspects that enable a green building environment? So you would see 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1 and 2 broadly. One is actually the creation of green building codes and regulations. This, in all cases across the world, is under the purview of the government. And then the next part is actually the control. That is, in terms of once the building comes into operation, once it's commissioned, uh, how does energy get used? How does water get used? Is there a monitoring and control mechanism of this? Is there a monitoring of how well the regulations are actually applied? And so the left-hand side, the points number 1 and 2 actually come under broadly government control. Now, the third point is equally important, which is the market. And in the market, you have green building certification systems that kind of encourage and push the idea of green buildings. And so we have from the World Bank Group side, we have the EDGE certification, which is playing an extremely active role in many countries across the world. And then, of course, there is the capacity building aspect, which is predominantly knowledge and knowledge dissemination, capacity building. Capacity building can cover a whole swath of people, right from professionals in the industry to students to government officials, the technical side, the administrative side. A lot of them need to be sensitized towards the need for green building. The bank again has been very active in the regulation part of it, in the and in the capacity building aspect. IFC itself has a program called the DFGE, which actually trains the trainers across probably about 15 or 18 countries right now and expanding fast. And of course, they have their own EDGE expert program. So there is a lot of capacity building that's happening from the bank's end. So this kind of gives you an overview of the four pillars that sort of support the green building environment. This is another aspect that we like to kind of differentiate. There is these two aspects of on one side you have the regulations and the other side you have the certification systems. In a way, both do the same thing. That is essentially help buildings achieve certain benchmarks. The idea is that the green building regulations, at its in a most ideal way, it should be applicable to all buildings across the market. But usually, they will have a lower benchmark of efficiency set. The idea being that markets are not always ready for very high benchmarks of efficiencies. So you want to keep a low benchmark, but by catching as many buildings as one can, it actually makes a huge impact in terms of GHG savings because of the sheer volume of the savings when you actually add it all up. Now, on the certification side, so really, in a way, if you could look at it, the regulations are really pushing up the market from below. You're basically taking up the market. The green building certification systems are until really EDGE appeared on the market. A lot of it was really the top 2%, 3% of the market, maybe not even that much, that actually followed the best practices in green buildings. So there were programs like LEED and BREEAM, and almost every developed country has their own version of it, and in many emerging economies as well. The green building certifications really do a pull up. So there is always this constant tension between in a good way, tension between the green building regulations at the lower level and the certification systems from the upper level. Edge actually has helped because of the nature of the tool itself, and the nature of the certification system has helped broad base this entire sort of market. So you have more buildings being able to take up better standards. So which I think I don't want to take away Omid's airtime on this. So yeah, so Omid will explain more about that. So what are the components in building regulations? So we identified 7 broad areas. So to start with, it's the site and context. It's the context in which a building gets built that has an impact on the ecology and on the GHG emissions. We have the energy efficiency, which really is the core, in a way, of the number of measures that one can use to be able to achieve a good amount of GHG mitigation. Water efficiency is extremely important. Like I said, it's a finite source. Building materials is another aspect, because once you have selected a building material, you're essentially locking in either a very efficient, a low embodied energy material, or a very high embodied energy material. So the idea also is that by selecting low embodied energy materials, the market will then give signal for the building manufacturing market to have lower embodied energy material. Just to give you an example, I live and practice in South India, and bricks used to be, until about 25 years ago, the most common material for masonry. And now it's almost out of the market in that sense, at least where I practice in Bangalore. So and we have switched to concrete blocks, which have much lower embodied energy. So in terms of that whole market transformation, it just makes so much sense. Construction, of course, is another aspect that one needs to be extremely mindful about, especially now in emerging economies where you have so much construction happening, that construction pollution can really become a big aspect of the city's pollution, like places like Delhi, which comes in the news every winter. The occupational safety, health, and comfort, this not fully connected with the GHG emission potential, but there are some aspects that we need to take into consideration, so we need to check for that. And then, of course, the solid waste management aspect of an operational building. Now, that has an impact. So if you can design buildings which are more which encourage occupants to segregate waste, it's always much better on the environment. So yeah, so just breaking these down, site and context, essentially, we sort of looked at 3 broad topics under that. One was to be able to do some target setting and also create the project team right in the beginning. Ecology and environment is another aspect that one needs to look at. What kind of ecology are we siting the building in? Does it have far-reaching implications on downstream effects on the environment, on the soil, on the flora and fauna, and all those things. And then building and transport. So where is the building sited, and how is it connected to the transport? Is there efficient public transport coming into the place near the building? All those things are as important. On the energy side, we are really looking at, the idea is to reduce the demand side. So that means, let's say if you have more efficient lighting, more efficient walls that would better insulated walls that would reduce the need for either warmth or for cooling. That's sort of the idea of reducing the demand side measures. On the supply side, you're looking at alternative sources of energy like solar and all that. And then, of course, there is the aspect of knowledge and behavior management by doing sub-metering and various other aspects that will actually encourage users to make it uh, much more, to lead a much more energy efficient lifestyle. On the water efficiency, very similar. Look at the demand side in terms of having low flow faucets, having better showers and things like that. And on the supply side, try to see if there are renewable ways of or more resilient ways of actually sourcing water, like rainwater, where it's possible, so that you're not extracting precious groundwater, let's say. Those are the aspects that one can look at a building level. And then, of course, again, the knowledge and behavior management. Building materials, like I said, looking at recycled building materials, and I think with more emphasis on circular economy, there is a better way of sort of just to give you an example, steel is something that's getting recycled across the world now. And while you might use virgin steel for reinforcements, you might use recycled steel for security purposes, like you might have grills on your windows or things like that that can be actually made out of recycled steel, and that's becoming a common practice. And we are hoping that more and more companies can come in and sort of take responsibility for the entire circularity of this whole thing. And then, of course, looking at the low embodied energy materials itself. So that has a big impact to play. Then, of course, the smaller aspects in terms of construction pollution, not really small, but they're things that need attention. Occupancy, occupant safety, health, and comfort in terms of indoor air quality, indoor sensory comfort, the CO2 levels inside, especially in large format spaces like hospitals and offices and hotels. And then, of course, the solid waste management in terms of at least the segregation of waste. So these are the sort of 7 broad components that we have. So the checklist really is based on this. And so some of the interesting aspects before I get into the how to use the checklist is really policy instruments that can be used for scaling up green building. And this is something that would be useful for people at the bank. You do have 2 broad types. You have the non-financial incentives, and these are just a few examples. They're not exhaustive in that sense. There have been countries which have had expedited approvals, for example. So if, let's say, a building approval takes, let's say, 4 months, they would expedite it by a month so that the project can start earlier if it's a green building. Or if certain municipalities give you a higher floor area ratio, which is essentially if you have 1,000 square meter, a floor area ratio would be, if let's say if it's 2, that means you can build a total of 2,000 square meters on that 1,000 square meter plot. So in some cases, they would give you an extra 10%. So that actually helps the building owner to build more for the same cost of land. So it sort of makes your per square meter or per square foot cost of your floor area slightly cheaper to that extent. So those are sort of incentives that are there on the non-financial side that the governments can actually provide. On the financial side, you have property tax reductions and lower mortgage rates. Certain countries have had, in fact, I think IFC has been active with banks across the world to try to reduce mortgage rates if there are certified green buildings. So this is really the checklist itself. So broadly, there are sort of 6 steps that somebody can follow. Of course, the person who would use this checklist is really a green building expert. So that's something that, so if you're looking at it from a country level TTL's perspective, you probably need to get somebody who's a green building specialist to actually take you through this process. So, of course, so when it comes to green buildings, when we actually did this checklist, we studied about 12 codes from 12 different countries. And they were located in different continents. So we looked at Africa, Asia, Europe, South America, and North America. And we also compared it across different climate systems, because climates are sort of integral to building performance, building energy performance. So that's something that we had done. So it was also interesting in terms of how green building regulations are really embedded in the overall regulatory framework. So certain countries have a standalone green building code. So you could have, say, Colombia, Vietnam, having standalone green building codes. There are some others which, like in Ghana, is a part of a broader national building code, which has various chapters, and then they have green buildings as one chapter. And then there are some which do not necessarily have a single green building code, but the green building code um, would be distributed across various core disciplines. So because green building is not just a single discipline, it draws from water, it draws from air conditioning, it draws its measures from electricity. So there are some countries like Armenia, for example. What we're finding right now with our engagement with them is that many of their resource efficiency measures are all embedded in different codes. So that's sort of the broad three types that we have found. And and then, of course, so for somebody who's using the checklist, one would need to then first, of course, identify what is the form that the green building code is in, and then kind of look at this as a filter, the seven broad green building measures, the broad chapters, and try to sort of take all the various measures, parse them through this as a filter, so to be able to kind of get a more comprehensive sort of an understanding of how where many of these sit. And there might be cases where you might not see anything on building materials, for example, or something on solid waste management. So then you get a sense of where this whole green building code sits. And I must say that it's not necessary that these green building codes have to be perfect. What I'm also realizing after many years is that it's not so much about having the best green building code. It's about something that's implementable, that's something where there is clarity in terms of the kind of measures that we are aiming for. As long as that particular country uh, meets its NDCs in some way and also meets for its unique regulatory sort of environment, uh, then it's fine. I mean, if a country is not ready to currently look at, let's say, solid waste management or construction pollution, maybe that's fine, and they can be taken as steps. This is how just a snapshot of the checklist itself, the heart of the checklist. So you have a topic that's on your left-hand side, and then there is, let's say, this daylighting, and then there is a relevance to what daylight does for buildings, and then there are diagnostic questions. So it's a fairly easy to use sort of a tool, and so you can do a systematic review, measure by measure, actually. Uh, Also, while we look at the micro, which is the green building code itself, but it's also useful to kind of understand what is the country context, what are the kind of major building types, what's the trend in terms of that particular country, what are the kind of buildings that are going to come up in the next 15 or 20 years, what are the present benchmarks in terms of electricity and water consumption. So those are the aspects that one needs to look at. What and how well have the green building materials penetrated into the market? For example, is solar PV something that's available or not? So one needs to also be very sensitive to that aspect. And also, what's the kind of capacity out there? What are the green building professionals? How many are available there? What's the sort of institutional structures that are available in that country? These are absolutely important to look at as well. And also there are this interface with other regulations that happens. This is just an example of India, where on the building regulation structure itself, which is on the left-hand side. You have the National Building Code, which is not mandatory, but it's just a guidance. And then you have state level Town and Country Planning Act, which is more of an enabling act. And then at the municipal level, you have the mandatory green building regulations. But the green building itself may be in a slightly different way. So in India, for example, you have a separate Energy Conservation Act, which was passed in 2001. And then the first Energy Conservation Building Code that came in 2007 and then later got revised in 2017. But you can see that here, it's very clearly it's only energy. It doesn't consider water. But water has been again regulated at the municipal level separately, depending upon which state one is in. So these are so it's very important for the country team to kind of understand what the unique complexities of the interface with the other regulations are. And then, of course, you complete the checklist. You can put it into an Excel sheet and sort of look at all the recommendations and put it down as a aspect. We did a few pilot examples. I'm going to go through this quickly because I see that I'm sort of at the border of time limit. In Kenya, there were sort of two codes that had come up for review. That was the National Building Code itself, and then there was a separate regulation on green buildings. And what we found, for example, is that they wanted to kind of include all new buildings into this entire space and into this entire regulation. And at some level, it was trying to mimic the green building certification system. So there's always this danger of the government becoming too ambitious and trying to have very high standards for green building regulations. And so our recommendation was that probably it's a good idea to kind of first do a capacity building prior to the launch, and then also to simplify the code itself. And there was some sort of ambiguities regarding certain performance benchmarks that they had mentioned. So we kind of have put in our recommendations to kind of simplify those as well and make it more clear. Then we did Seashells, which was a broad physical planning building regulations, which was getting amended in 2022. And we found certain measures for water efficiency that were not clear. There was not too many on the energy side as well. So we felt that there was a need for, so what we recommended is that you needed to have a more rigorous approach to resource efficiency and also to have better clarity in terms of benchmarks for green measures. We then worked on Comoros, and all these are being done by the BRR team that Keiko and Anna are leading. So the Comoros was unique because it was not really to do with a code as such, but they were already engaged in looking at all the homes being better reinforced structurally. So they took the opportunity to add a few aspects of green building as well. So we really looked at, because we found that it is a low capacity environment, and we needed to be very mindful of what we recommended. So we sort of recommended simple things like better types of roofs, which can insulate better, better orientation of homes, so that you have better cross ventilation. So simple sort of suggestions like that, and they were sort of brought out in the form of recommendations as well. Armenia is work in progress right now, but what we found was that broadly there were two energy efficient building regulations that one was published in 2016 and the other one in 2022. And then we were called in to kind of look at the 2022 version of it, and we found that there's more a methodology to estimate heat gains and losses into the building, so rather than being sort of a directive. So it didn't have the approach that a normal regulation takes in terms of a prescriptive sort of an approach. So what we have sort of recommended is that there's probably work in progress. You need to have a longer engagement on this, but what we are proposing right now is the development of a guidebook. So the idea is to look at two things. One is to put all the existing green building regulations in one place and to make it easy for a practicing professional to follow it. On the other side, we are also looking at best practices across the region for that unique climate that there is in Armenia. It's extremely hot during summers and extremely cold during winters. So it's sort of 40 to minus 20, so that's sort of so it does have unique challenges to that. So our guidebook sort of will help professionals navigate the solution regulations. UNDP has been extremely active in this place, so we are sort of collaborating with them on this project.
Basu, sorry to interrupt, but we're running out of time. So
Yeah,
if you
sure.
can
So I'm
wrap
on
up.
my last slide. Yeah, I'm on my last slide. So yeah, so what are the opportunities in terms of green buildings as far as the bank is concerned? I think one is in terms of looking at the regulations itself, both into the existing regulations or helping develop a comprehensive building code, looking at the capacity in terms of building professionals, uh, to also sort of effectively use the voluntary mechanism to complement regulatory systems, and of course, use the power of communication to raise benefits of awareness, to raise awareness of benefits. And of course, there is the idea of upgradation of existing buildings, because that is something that is extremely important, as well as investing in new resource efficient buildings as well. Yeah, and in terms of course, the overall infrastructure in terms of sustainable electric supply, water supply, all that, So yeah, that done. I am sort of on my last slide, and thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Basu. That was very enlightening, and also with the examples of the application. So we will move now forward with the relation to other initiatives by the World Bank and how this can contribute and what are the synergies with it. So we will have Swati. She's an urban specialist, part of the global program. She has more than 12 years of experience working across disaster risk management and urban development, and she will tell us how this aligns and complements with all the discussions on the Paris alignment and the goals that we have to meet with the World Bank projects. So over to you, Swati.
Thank you so much, Anna. Good morning, everyone. So I'm also a LEED certified architect with experience in green buildings in my past life before the bank. So this topic is very close to me. Right now, as a focal point for Paris alignment with the global unit, I just wanted to, specifically focus on buildings. But before that, some of you might have taken the training. I just want to give an overview for Paris alignment, as all of you know already, that we want to make sure that the development objective and any investment activities within your operation, any program, any policy that you are investing in, is consistent with the country's pathway towards a low GHG emission and a climate resilient development pathway of that particular country, right? And to be approved, every operation needs to look at both mitigation and adaptation side. As Kiko mentioned and Vasu also mentioned, building plays a very, very critical role in achieving Paris alignment, especially at the global climate level. Building itself is a long-lived asset. It does come with a high carbon lock-in risk. Buildings include not just the residential, but also the non-residential buildings like hospitals, schools that bank invest in a lot of our projects, right? And again, as Vasu said, it contributes more than 30% of the global energy, and electricity nearly accounts for 55% of that energy consumption. So I won't go too much into all of this. You guys know the stats very well, that the direct emissions from the fossil fuels in buildings reached 3 gigatons, but it's actually the indirect emissions, which are almost 3 times that are used for electricity and heat use for cooling, appliances, and lighting in the buildings. There's also the adaptation side of it. Every building is susceptible to various climate hazards, more so now with the extreme temperatures and precipitation. We're talking about flooding, temperatures, cyclones, storms, etc. Not to forget that 1/3 of the global population resides in informal settlements, right? Mostly in developing countries. So these informal buildings, they are of lower structural quality. They're often located in high-risk areas. So what we are doing right now, some of you would know that we have already a sector note for urban, and building is one of the subsector in that. But we are also working on a specific note on buildings to basically help project task teams with all this essential knowledge and tools that Kiko was also talking about, and providing answers in terms of how to do the assessments. But overall, in Paris alignment, and if you look at buildings, there is a universally aligned activity list, which was co-developed with other MDBs. And these are the activities that are doing no harm or basically contributing to the decarbonization of that country. We're talking about both new as well as reconstructed buildings, which meet either the EDGE level 1 certification, and Omid from IFC will talk a little more about what that means. While EDGE 1 is the gold standard, we recognize completely that there are a lot of countries where even building regulations are not in place, as Kiko and Vasu alluded to. And so, but they might have national codes, they might have global certifications, which are equivalent, or they can use passive design features and other things to achieve a 20% energy consumption savings from the baseline of what that building would, usually consume. And so that is equivalent to EDGE 1. And if you have a building within your project that is looking at either of those, you can fall into the universally aligned activity list, and therefore you can avoid the assessment, the next steps of assessment, which is basically once you assess the risk, then you look at the measures to reduce that risk. Of course, if it's a fully electrified building, energy efficient building that's meeting entirely its energy demand through renewables, then it's also universally aligned. But more so, we will realize in most of our projects, we would have, either a low impact, which is a fully electrified building, but it's connected to grid. We might have a moderate to significant impact where, you may have building types that do not include space conditioning. Those are smaller buildings, like community centers or some of those that does not use very high energy intensive appliances, and do not use fossil fuels for water heating. So it'll fall into that moderate category. But there are still some places, where you may have buildings that are using fossil fuels for water heating, or have energy intensive equipment or appliances like in hospitals where you can't avoid all of that. And so therefore it can have significant emission risk. Now, again, it doesn't mean that your building is not aligned. It just means it does have a high risk of emissions, and therefore you need to include measures to reduce that risk to a low risk category. One thing to highlight here, we are only focusing on operational carbon, scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. What that means is we are not looking at embodied energy and all of that, because it becomes very difficult to really monitor it. So we are looking at two things. One is, what is the main driver of energy consumption in your building, right? The appliances, the lighting, space conditioning, all of that. And then what is the mix of energy sources? Are you connected to grid? Is it powered through renewables, and so forth? So as I said, if your project is in that universally aligned activity list, right? And it meets that specific criteria that we talked about. We'll focus on, the compliance. In this, we're going to a little bit talk about the building codes and energy certification that Vasu alluded to. What you really need to, again, check, because we had these tools that Vasu highlighted. You check your compliance with the local codes. Now, you will have to check if these standards are equal or if they're exceeding the level 1 EDGE certification requirements. There are tools out there that can help you do that, and the checklist that Kiko and Vasu alluded to. There are certain countries which do have certification, global certification. You have EDGE, you have BREEAM, you have LEED, and again, different countries have their different certifications as well. So that is something that you can check. You should also check the compliance and sufficiency of the building codes. In doing that, and those steps Vasu has already talked about, so I'm going to skip that part of it. But if if your project do have a risk, and if it's not in that universally aligned, as I said, then you're looking at measures. There are multiple measures, and again, the sector note do talk about some of these measures, but it's a summarized version. It doesn't talk about a lot, and that's why the separate building note that we are working on will have a better checklist for this. The main point here to remember is, can you reduce your energy demand for thermal comfort and lighting, right? And there are a lot of different ways to do that. It also includes passive design features like site planning and building design that Vasu talked about. You have to look at the energy efficient equipments. If you are procuring any of those, are there energy standards that you can follow? Is there a, of course, keeping in background the project context. I think that is very, very important in Paris alignment. Your project context, your city context, whether it's technically and financially feasible to have that. But we encourage the teams to look at energy standards for anything that they are procuring. Electrification for sure, replacing any fossil fuel-based system and appliances with efficient electric systems. You are also looking at clean energy sources for heating. Your building, whether if it's possible to meet a portion of your building energy demand through renewables on site, through solar or wind systems, and then other passive design features like window insulations and others that can dramatically reduce your energy demand as well. Depends on the context, you're looking at both, right? The extreme heat, precipitation, and others. Energy audits, and I will let Amit talk about EDGE, but for the buildings that are considered moderate or significant emission risk category, the project teams are encouraged to conduct an energy audit. They can use EDGE tool that Amit will talk about and what is required. But there are certain cases where EDGE would not work if you have data limitations, if you are not clear on what kind of buildings, the dimensions, what kind of energy demand and so forth. But in those cases, and if it is a bigger building, like a hospital or a school or whatever that you're building within the project, then the other way to go about is also hiring a local energy auditor. I see Jess Singh has joined from the Energy TP, and we had a good discussion with him where they do this on regular basis in a lot of their projects. They have, good TORs and good connections for their local energy auditors in particular cities that you may be working on. So that's another way to check, because this is a question that comes up a lot. How do I make sure that I'm getting that 20% energy savings, which is required for your building to be aligned. And you would need some sort of calculations to justify that. Now, in a smaller building, it is relatively easier if you're using renewables and some design features. In a bigger building, you may need to do an energy audit or use the edge tools or other similar tools that are out there. And those tools talk about not just the energy, but also your water conservations and other that Vasu talked about. On the adaptation side, as I said, building investments will face significant impact. I think no matter where your building is, whichever city, there will be some sort of physical climate risk. And a lot of the time, we do this already in most of our GPERL projects. We do look at resilience, and we do like flood modeling and all of this in the preparation studies as well. So that can all feed into your Paris alignment assessment. But I do want to highlight that you need to look at the overall palette of climate risk, right? And not just flooding or sea level rise, but also extreme heat. And buildings will play, will be affected by that. So you need to, again, it's context specific. It will vary from location to location. There are tools out there in the bank. You can use the climate change knowledge portal. You can use climate and disaster risk screening. Again, it uses country level data. So if you have city level data, if you have granular data, then we encourage the teams to use that for their identifying the adaptation risk. And then, going stage by stage on different measures to reduce that risk to an acceptable level. You can never get to that low level, but reducing it to acceptable level. Now, this can include, things in planning side of it, having more climate informed risk planning in the design and construction. It might also include institutional capacity and coordination where building regulations come in play, operation, maintenance, retrofitting, etc. So we have all these measures listed. Yeah, that's my last slide. But happy to take any questions. But as Kiko said, I think Omid is going to talk about the edge tools specifically and some of the approaches that the task teams can take to make that advances specifically to the building sector. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Thank you, Swati, and sorry for rushing you, but we are trying to fit the agenda and make the adjustments needed. And I hope you have taken notes and you contact Swati if you have further questions. I would like to introduce now Omid Saberi. He's the Global Technical Lead for the Edge Green Building Certification from IFC, and also he's the Global Lead for the Building Resilience Index. So Omid, without further introductions, over to you.
Perfect, thank you. And I'll try to be brief and have a few slides to go through. Very nice to be here. Very briefly, I wanted to start with saying that last week we published at IFC a report called Building Green. It's a report that shows the opportunity of the gap in emerging markets, $1.5 trillion in green buildings. This report talks about how we can deal with existing buildings, new buildings, as well as building materials decarbonization. I encourage you, I sent the link in the chat. Please have a look at this report. This was 1.5 years of work that we did. It's kind of complements the work that Keiko and Vasu has done on the regulations. So within IFC, we have a couple of tools that kind of touches with the work that we are working here. One of them is called Edge. I'll explain briefly some of the applications of Edge in World Bank projects as well as IFC projects, so you can get a sense of how it can help you with your projects. We have developed also Building Resilience Index that, as Niels mentioned, a green building can only be a good building when it's resilient. So we need to also measure the resilience of the buildings. There's another tool for cities that I'm not going to talk about it here, but that's called the Apex that we are also developing at the city level. I want to give you some examples so that we can see in actual fact how this forms our built environment, right? So this is a neighborhood in Buenos Aires. It was a slum area, and it has been upgraded by a project by World Bank. You probably have seen this project before, but the visual can give you a bit better sense of the impact of greening the assets, right? So this building, if you see these new strips of buildings, housing sector, they are being EDGE certified with 52% energy efficiency, 30% water efficiency, and 45% of materials efficiency. As you see, these buildings already have solar panels for electricity. They have also solar hot water to generate their hot water supply. And as you see, it not only brings a better quality of assets, but also it delivers savings for the tenants. And I would show you a short video of how these savings would impact people's lives. This is another project that done in Tamil Nadu with EDGE. It has two pieces, and one of them has $200 million of investment by World Bank in housing, and another one is $50 million of investment in housing. And as a principle, when we heard Swati in terms of Paris alignment, now if we are investing in housing or in any investment that includes development or improvements of buildings, then using EDGE simplifies the process for us, because we don't need to go to every single of these buildings and inspect them. A third party will inspect and provide the certificate, but also it creates local skills and local expertise that even if we are not engaged in that project anymore, the local teams can continue working on these type of projects. This is a hospital project in India, in Bangalore. Again, EDGE certified. One of the interesting things here is the savings, right? It saves $5,700 per month on their utilities. With that money, one can go and hire doctors or nurses to support the hospital work, right? Rather than spending that on their utilities. And that's the benefit of this type of work that we can offer to the clients. I'm gonna stop sharing and share again to make sure that we have the sound of video. The next slide would be a short video for you to get a sense of how this project worked in South Africa. So I'm gonna play this video for you.
When we lived in Elstriver, there was a few problems. The gangsterism is very bad there. The boys there, 9, 8 years old, they're running with guns around. You can't let your kids play outside anymore.
I didn't want my kids.
I'm sorry, I don't know why the internet is slowing down here.
Bella Gardens is
Outside anymore.
I didn't want my kids to grow up in that environment.
Madulumo is a not-for-profit company. I started it in 2005. trying to get people out of bad buildings and out of the street into decent accommodation. Inadequate housing brings lots of its own challenges. There's lots of gangs, drugs, alcohol abuse. It's a breeding ground for crime. So we wanted to create hope, and I think housing is one of those things that creates hope. When Madulumo started to look at the greening of our projects, it was purely driven from a cost point of view of utilities. How can we get utilities down? So if we talk about electricity or we talk about water, how do we design in such a way that you get a green building? The IFC is an international finance corporation. They designed a tool called EDGE. EDGE stands for Excellence in Design for Greater Efficiencies. EDGE helps developers to think green, but also then to apply it into their design from the onset. Bella Gardens is the first EDGE certified social housing project in South Africa. Our tenants are telling us how much better it is to live there.
For me, it's to have security in your complex. It's most of the best things we experience. My kids can play outside.
The first thing they noticed was the parking, because there wasn't parking in Elstrava that you can take your kids to. Yeah, I'm standing out by the window and I look to the parking, and it's very nice for them.
We thrive for something different. And with this, we were privileged enough to get an EDGE certificate. Yes, gives us food, fruit, vegetables, all in there.
For Bella Gardens, we got a reduction in energy. That is because our window to wall ratio, the fact that we used heat pumps. Water saving, that's because of the water restrictors that we placed onto all of the taps. People can see the consumption, the education that goes about that. If you know you stay in a place which was designed to be energy efficient, if there's a different mindset there, then you also want to save energy. And what does it mean for me and my family? And then you start to use less water because you also want to contribute to the ethos.
I'm saving maybe around about 1,000 rand every month.
There's a huge difference in that time and now. So now I can go extra with the food. I can buy extra food, I can buy extra clothes, extra shoes for them. There's no more like I don't have now, and I can't do it now.
Knowing that people can save money, it makes me really feel that I'm doing something right, or at least we are doing something right. All we are is a stepping stone. Our objective is to getting you through the journey, giving them that step to the future. With the savings that you can achieve just by following the simple green solutions which we have in place, you will grow and get your own place.
So I applied to move into Bella Gardens early in 2015. At Bella Gardens, we saved with rent, we saved with electricity, big time. Big news, we're moving to a bigger house.
When you change people's behavior patterns, you change their lives, not in a small way, but in a big way. And sustainability showed me that there's things better out there than what we used to.
And I think that's the blueprint. The blueprint is that how does it make a community change? How does it make children look different at the place where they're staying? We can do this again. We've got a blueprint that we can do again and that we should do again.
Okay, so it just gives you a sense of how this can work in actual life. We have certified already 400,000 homes around the world and around $62 billion of assets. So it is a proven process that has been working. I'm not going to go to too much detail, but just to show you that we can get, as Swati said, the basic level is EDGE certified, but we can go all the way to zero carbon building if we target, and it adds roughly around 1 to 4% of construction costs. So it's not a cost that we cannot afford to pay, but with doing that, then we are really supporting communities in different ways. There's a lot of banks that are already using EDGE for their green finance, but also there are lots of banks that they provide green mortgages with EDGE. That makes it easier for the home buyers to get green mortgages as well. We have been working with number of projects with World Bank. For example, recently we did 100,000 homes in Senegal, was certified. We're working with a bank project in Egypt for 25,000 homes, and also in Indonesia. And we have done some work in the supply chain in China. But the impact that the potential that we have for edge is massive. This is only the ones that we worked with IBRD. On IFC side, we have done projects in 120 countries. And very briefly, also, we have developed the Building Resilience Index program that is measuring the resilience of assets against different natural disasters. It looks at 15 disasters and understanding how buildings are performing and how we can improve buildings for those disasters. Again, this work we have started in Philippines, Dominican Republic, and a number of countries now, and we are growing it. These are some of the houses that they are measured by Building Resilience Index, but also they are certified by EDGE, and it kind of meets the Paris alignment on BB1 and BB2, looking at mitigation as well as adaptation and resilience. I'm going to stop here and give the time for question and answers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Omid, and that was really very interesting, and the video was really very impressive, so we appreciate sharing that experience. We have a few questions on the chat. I recommend everyone to start posting the questions, and if we are not able to reach to your question, reach out directly to the speakers. But Sandrine was talking about that one aspect of green buildings is about the footprint to land ratio. Basil, can you talk about that and if that is being included in the toolkit?
Yeah, so the footprint aspect has been covered, but not from really a green building point of view. There are a few countries that have a provision called ground coverage. So if you have a certain area, then you're not permitted to occupy more than 50% or 60% or 70%. It is sort of self-limiting I mean, it is limiting in that way. That's more to do with the easement of light and ventilation for the neighboring buildings. So it's not really been looked at from the perspective of green building as such, although it is definitely a good measure to have. But I haven't seen examples where these have been regulated from the angle of greening cities. I haven't seen yet. Yeah.
Thank you, Basil. And Jan, would you want to share a little bit on that experience on DPLs that you are mentioning in the chat?
Sure, sure. Just briefly, I think this is a very good example. I have been the co-TTL for the Tamil Nadu housing sector engagement, and the DPL, the two programmatic theory, in the housing sector in Tamil Nadu has indeed been providing the enabling environment, especially the second one where we also helped the government actually, getting deeper into implementing their own kind of green building code in Tamil Nadu. So I cannot, I cannot emphasize enough about this over enabling environment, the bigger impact that this type of policy environment would have in the actual performance of the sector. Over. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jan, for sharing with us. Anyone else with any questions? I don't have anything on the chat, but if you want to just raise your hand or open your mic directly, we still have 5 minutes before closing. So I have one question here in the room.
Thank you. I just wanted to refer back to that 4 building blocks that Vasu was presenting for the green building environment. And I think one block where I think we need more reinforcing is definitely that control bit, because it's directly linked to the implementation. So setting up a great broad comprehensive building codes framework is great, but it's a start. So I was wondering if the urban team has had worked on helping clients with the actual implementation, ensuring that these building codes are monitored and properly reported and also reinforced over time. Thank you.
Yeah. Was the question for me? I'm not sure because I'm not from the urban team. So
Yeah, no, I think Keiko can speak about the experience of what we have been doing in supporting teams in building control. But I just wanted also to highlight the differences that we are noticing among our clients, no? So if you work as a lead specialist in Africa and with the diagnostic we saw in Africa, they are far behind on the regulation. So they are even starting and they have some control measures without a regulation. So we don't know what they are checking when they do this building control. So that's a huge gap. But as you move to middle income countries where they have more advances in the regulation, the control becomes really very important, as you highlighted. And we have been supporting several teams on that. Keiko, if you can share some of that experience.
Yeah, I mean, indeed, many countries doesn't have complete building code or building regulation, and also in terms of the control aspect, they do some level of checks, but then, it's maybe usually it's something easy, like, okay, what about like setback from the main road or something, but, not necessarily checking about, the design of the building or energy efficiency of the building, for example. So we are also help the government to come up with better controlling mechanism and also the checklist, for for them to do the check. But again, the level of the achievement is still very limited, and then yeah, there's a big room for us to also contribute in this area. Yeah, and I think Omid, you wanted to come in on this issue. I think maybe from the energy audit point of view.
Right. So what I wanted to say is that I think the access and the action that we have in different markets needs to be comprehensive, right? We have to support building regulations to grow. At the same time, a lot of countries, they have very limited capacity on regulations, right? While we are growing the capacity on regulations side, we can also bring, as before Wasu mentioned, certain incentives to the market so that voluntary systems in that triangle that Wasu showed, there's regulations and there's voluntary mechanisms that can support regulations, like the way that Edge is trying to build capacity while in the private sector or public sector while the regulations are being developed. Because what we can do is kind of like try to influence the market from different angles and hope that market starts shifting.
Yeah, I think that's a good point because you often see is market doesn't know what they have to comply with, and then the government also don't know maybe from the comprehensive perspective what they're checking against, because some elements are checked by fire department, some elements are checked by like an environment department, and this checking process is not integrated in like one platform or kind of one sequences. So we actually help bringing all different kind of partners together into one platform and then try to assist like a more comprehensive kind of check-in process. But it takes time because the different entity doesn't speak to each other, and then but we are helping currently in Sierra Leone and Liberia on this issue, and then also collaborating with land people because they're also trying to bring in land controlling measure and land use perspective too. So we hope that this area can maybe go more, and we are also helping Maldives on this controlling digitalization and also reform the process reform as well. So maybe
Yeah, as government are evolving with the e-services process and also with COVID, there was a huge incentive on really try to make this more efficient. So the issue of creating the platform, the issue of understanding what are the regulations, who is checking what, and putting it in one platform has helped them kind of to work in a more articulated way, and hopefully also expedite the process and reduce the timing for the permits and everything, and avoid a little bit the corruption elements too. So that's our hope. A lot of work to do moving forward, but I think this has been a very good start of the conversation. And I hope you were able to see what are the tools that are available, who is the people working around these topics, and you can follow up directly and continue the conversation as your projects evolve. So I will hand it over now to Niels for the clip.
Just for me left to say, I think thanks to you all for participating, and in particular thanks to Omid and Vasu and Swati for your participation. I personally learned quite a bit. I'm no green building expert. I'm slightly better informed now. Clearly, this is an area that probably the bank has a chance to create quite some impact. That's relevant, of course, both across resilience side of the climate equation, but also clearly the mitigation side as the main topic here. It's complicated because, as you can tell from the conversation, this is an IFC piece of the puzzle. There's a World Bank piece of the puzzle within the World Bank. There's an urban piece of the puzzle, but there's an energy piece of the puzzle. There's a land piece of the puzzle. And these pieces are led or driven by different players, no? So I don't think we quite yet have managed to assemble the puzzle, but knowing about each other and about each other's tools maybe helps more of the frontline task teams access the right information and the right people, hopefully at the right time, that can enable us to create a higher impact. So thanks a lot, everyone, for joining. Of course, thanks to Keiko and Anna, my own team, for setting it all up. And we look forward to continue to work with you all. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.